As Russian forces advance at their fastest pace in almost about a year, and Donald Trump is back in the White House again this January, Kyiv is facing a pretty harsh reality. And our next story explains as to how Ukraine is forced to confront the harsh geopolitical realities and consider the previously unthinkable compromises. Take a look at this report.
After nearly 3 years of relentless fighting, Russian missile strikes continue to devastate cities across Ukraine, with Odessa among the latest hit. Night strikes have damaged residential buildings, churches, educational institutions, and critical heating infrastructure as Ukraine braces for its harshest winter yet. Moscow's persistent strikes have shattered much of Ukraine's energy grid, heightening fears of a freezing, deadly winter for the civilian population.
We were sitting in a shelter. We started to hear something nearby. We were waiting for what would happen next. In general, I am very sensitive to this, to the war, to all these explosions. And this is probably the first of such destructive moments I have ever seen.
Ukrainian President Zelensky was adamant till a week ago that no Ukrainian territory will be surrendered. However, Kyiv is now indicating a potential shift towards a different priority: security guarantees. With Trump known for his critical stance on US support for Ukraine and his long-standing ties with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Ukraine is moving quickly to secure commitments that could prevent future invasions rather than focusing solely on the current battlefield lines.
We're going to work on Middle East, and we're going to work very hard on Russia and Ukraine. It's got to stop. Russia and Ukraine's got to stop.
Meanwhile, Russia is signaling that it may be open to talks, but with a condition: any agreement must reflect the realities on the ground. In other words, Ukraine must accept Moscow's territorial gains as a given, a steep demand that Kyiv has so far resisted. As Ukraine navigates these treacherous waters, the stakes could not be higher. The choice is between territorial integrity and lasting security guarantees, while the window for negotiation narrows with each passing day. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what is happening at the moment, we're being joined by Mr. Joachim Bitterlich, who's a former German ambassador to the NATO alliance and also the former European diplomatic and security advisor to the former German Chancellor Helmut Kohl. He's joining us live on this broadcast. Mr. Bitterlich, let me in fact start off by asking you with information that has just come in, where the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who's lost his majority in the German parliament, reportedly has spoken with the Russian President Vladimir Putin after a gap of almost about 2 years and has urged him to end this war. What is your reading on this? Why is Olaf Scholz doing it at this moment?
I'm aware of this message as you becoming aware. I just took note of his telephone call, with information about the telephone call between Chancellor Scholz and Vladimir Putin. Well, it corresponds to a certain, let's call it, mood in the German public, especially in his own party. The Social Democratic Party in Germany is split to some extent. There is one part which is supporting Ukraine in order to regain its territorial integrity, to regain its independence. And there's another part who would like to see peace negotiations as fast as possible with Moscow. And Scholz would like to go into, let's say, this election campaign till the elections on 23rd of February, with a bit this farmer to be the peace chancellor. At the same time, not only the chancellor who has changed the goals of the German army, who has left the pacifistic line of the Social Democrats, but at the same time, who is looking now for peace at the same time. This is what I call its politics.
Interesting, a peace chancellor, as you put it. Now, what happens in Ukraine will impact the security of Europe directly. Now, in the United States of America, that has backed the Ukrainian war effort, Donald Trump, the incoming president, has said that he wants to end this Russia-Ukraine war. Do you think at this moment the mood in Europe is also towards some kind of a negotiated settlement Because in the initial few months and in the last 2 years of the war, Germany and France to a very large extent had been stating that it is imperative, the only way this war can come to an end is by evicting all Russian soldiers from the Ukrainian territory. Do you think Europe is now about to change its stance there?
Well, it's interesting to observe. On the one hand, you see voices like you have just heard, Chancellor Scholz, but I see even in Paris certain voices declaring we should now try or do our best to enter into, let's say, peace negotiations at least, in order to get a ceasefire, in order to stop, let's say, this war. This is the first. The receipt is another one. The receipt is the real question, whether we should now allow, let's say, put security guarantees, whatever that means, security guarantees, because I do not see the entry of Ukraine into NATO with a settlement, or should we insist on, as, for example, Prime Minister Modi has been doing, insisting on territorial integrity of Ukraine at the same time while the country should become neutral. Where is the real goal? And the real question is, it's nice to hear from Donald Trump that he would call on Putin and to stop negotiations. But how to do this, where to do this, who should be the actors, let's say, to negotiate? I think there's an important role potentially for India, perhaps even more potential than for the Europeans.
You know, it's interesting that you say as to how these negotiations should proceed. Now, you've been a diplomatic and security advisor to the former German Chancellor Helmut Kohl. You know, and you made an interesting point where you say, can there be peace if Ukraine were to accept neutrality? Would the Russians be willing to cede back the territories that they've, you know, so far conquered in this war? Do you think that is a realistic possibility that Russia, if Ukraine were to accept neutrality, would be willing to cede the territories back that it now controls in Ukraine?
I've written about such an approach weeks before the beginning of this war, after talks in Moscow. And I'm insisting in the fact that if the Russians are assured that the country will be neutral, let's say for the next 25 years at least, and if the country is not, let's say, an attacking country against Russia, I think the Russians become a bit more flexible with regard to the content of a peace solution. This means they would be a bit more, let's say, flexible with regard to land, to territorial pieces. Yes.
Interesting.
I think so, yes.
Interesting. I mean, we need to wait and watch as to how the peace negotiations, whenever they start happening, will, of course, in what shape and form will they take. It'll be very interesting to watch out for. Go ahead and make your point, sir.
But please, what I say now is perhaps corresponding to what the minority in Europe is thinking.
All right. Very interesting. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Bitterlich, for joining us and getting us that perspective there.
A pleasure as always.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.